Most people think alchemy was about turning lead into gold. That's the version they gave us, the cartoon version. But if you're watching this, I'm guessing you're not most people. So let's drop the surface story and talk about what it really was. In this episode of Beyond the Known, we're not talking about gold and lead. We're talking about the real alchemy, the ancient science of altering life itself. From secret codes hidden in our blood to the forgotten experiments of gods and kings, we will tear open the veil no one dares to touch. The ancients feared it, the rulers hid it, the prophets warned against it. This is the knowledge that could rewrite humanity's fate. And tonight, we break the final seal on humanity's most dangerous secret, the forbidden science, rewriting the code of life. You see, long before the word science even existed, there were those who studied the essence of life itself, not just to understand it, but to manipulate it. The ancients called it the great work, the pursuit of something higher, divine even. But over time, it became something darker, twisted. Whispers of men who wanted to create life without God. Now ask yourself, why would anyone even try to do that? Because somewhere, buried deep in our earliest myths, there's a story of beings who came from the sky, not to worship, but to teach, to corrupt, to hand us secrets we weren't ready for. Sound familiar? That's because it shows up everywhere. Sumerian tablets, the Book of Enoch, even in ancient Vedic texts. They all talk about the same thing in different ways. The Watchers, the Anunnaki, the gods who fell. And what was the very first thing they gave mankind? Not fire, not tools, but knowledge of the flesh. They taught men how to mix roots, read the stars, and women how to enchant, how to bleed, how to seduce. They brought the knowledge of metal, stone, and the secrets of the womb. This wasn't science. This was biological sorcery, a direct tampering with the design of creation itself. And from that moment forward, there was a fracture in the timeline. One side walked in divine law, the other walked the path of those first sorcerers, trying to perfect man by unmaking him. It wasn't about gold, it was about flesh, about transforming something mortal into something immortal. And that obsession has never died. It just put on a lab coat. So when you hear words like gene therapy, biotech, or CRISPR, remember this chapter, because it all started here, with those who defied the blueprint and thought they could do better. Let's dig deeper, because the further down this rabbit hole we go, the more you'll start to realize this was never about metal, never about gold. It was always about you. You've probably heard of the Philosopher's Stone, right? That mythical object that could supposedly turn lead into gold. But what if I told you that was a cover story, a veil, one meant to keep the real alchemists hidden, while everyone else chased fairy dust? Because the true goal of alchemy wasn't gold, it was transformation, it was godhood, it was the rewriting of the human form itself. Alchemists spoke of the magnum opus, not just a philosopher's stone to turn lead to gold, but a stone to turn man into something else entirely, a key to shed the mortal shell, a blueprint to forge a new species, to create a being no longer bound by flesh, time, or death. This was the real secret, a science cloaked as mysticism, a forbidden art whispered behind locked doors. Now stay with me, because this isn't just medieval fantasy. It's a thread that weaves through secret orders, occult sciences, and modern biotech. And it all starts with what they used to call the Great Work. What was this great work? It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't even about immortality. Not exactly. It was about creating the perfect being. An artificial man. A god. Built, not born. One without sin, without soul, without divine oversight. And they even tried. Yes, you heard that right. In the 1500s, a Swiss alchemist named Paracelsus wrote detailed instructions on how to create a homunculus, a tiny artificial human. Not with machines, not with magic, but with human fluids, blood, bile, and unholy rituals that were whispered through monastery walls and secret libraries. They weren't experimenting with metals, they were experimenting with the spark of life itself. You see, these early alchemists weren't stupid. They weren't high on fumes in a stone cellar. They were hiding something. They spoke in symbols, because what they were really doing was so forbidden, so beyond the law of heaven, that it had to be coded. Lead equals the base human form. Gold equals the perfected post-human. The fire, that was transmutation, the sacred trauma, the spiritual surgery needed to evolve man into something more. Sound familiar? Because it should. That same obsession to create a better version of man didn't die out in the 1500s. It just went underground, passed through bloodlines, mystery schools, and hidden manuscripts, until it found its way into the hands of those who would later wear white coats instead of black robes. We're still following the same alchemical formula, only now the cauldron is digital, the tools are microscopic, and the gold is your DNA. Have you ever wondered why evolution was pushed so hard? I mean, ask yourself, why that theory? Why not the thousands of other ancient worldviews, from Sumer to Vedic India, that talked about humanity falling from something greater? Why did they replace all of that with the idea that we're just climbing up out of the muck, random cells becoming kings and billionaires? Here's the truth most people don't realize. Darwinism wasn't science. It was a belief system, a new religion for a world being forcibly cut off from the divine. And behind that belief was an agenda. So let's go deeper. Let's tear this veil. It began in the 1800s, the industrial era. Factories rose, churches crumbled, and the ruling class needed a way to justify their new empire. So in comes Charles Darwin, a soft-spoken naturalist with a theory that sounded scientific but hit like scripture. The fittest survive. And to the elite, that sounded like divine permission. Because if survival belongs to the fittest, then power belongs to those strong enough or clever enough to take it. And just like that, a dangerous new idea was born: eugenics. Now, don't let the word throw you off. Eugenics simply means good genes. Sounds innocent, right? But when powerful men decide who has the good genes, it doesn't stay innocent for long. Within decades, entire organizations were formed to improve the human race. Guess who backed them? The Rockefellers, the Carnegies. Even early Planned Parenthood was linked to eugenics circles. This wasn't fringe science, this was mainstream policy. They wanted to shape the future, not through freedom, but through selective breeding, forced sterilizations, and genetic control. And here's the part they'll never teach you in school. Before Hitler ever dreamed of the Aryan race, America was running forced sterilization programs. Tens of thousands of people were labeled unfit, too poor, too disabled, too rebellious. And so, they were silenced, wiped from the gene pool, all in the name of science. Now, does that sound like progress? Or does it sound like the modern mask of something much older? Because if you trace it back, that same obsession with blood purity and elite breeding goes all the way to Genesis 6. The Nephilim, the hybrid offspring, the manipulation of bloodlines. It never stopped, it just got rebranded. And it didn't end with the West. In the 1920s, in Soviet Russia, a man named Ilya Ivanov was tasked with something unthinkable, creating a human-ape hybrid. Yes, this really happened. Funded by the Bolshevik regime, Ivanov's experiments were designed to prove that man and beast could merge, to erase the line between divine creation and evolutionary product. He inseminated chimps with human sperm, even planned to inseminate women with ape DNA. He failed. But the intent, that's what matters. The goal was hybridization, to unmake the sacred image of humanity and replace it with something manufactured. Sound familiar? Because those same goals are still alive today. So now we arrive in the present, where words like CRISPR, synthetic biology, and gene drive are thrown around in TED Talks. But the spirit behind them, still the same. Still chasing the ancient great work. Still seeking the philosopher's stone. Only now, it's hidden in a double helix. And here's the real kicker. You probably think this is all happening in hidden labs, far away from you. But take a look around. Companies like 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, they're collecting your genetic material, feeding it into AI databases, mapping the code of the masses. Why? Because in the new order, data is power, and DNA is the currency of the soul. Let that sink in. Your blood, your children's blood, already part of a system that's being weaponized to shape the next phase of evolution. Not divine evolution, directed evolution, by people who think they're gods. So where does that leave us? Standing on a ledge, looking down into a world being rebuilt, cell by cell, code by code, and beneath it all, the same ancient whisper, "You shall be as gods." So here we are, not in ancient Babylon, not in a stone monastery, but in high-tech labs, hidden behind glass walls, glowing screens, and billion-dollar investments. But don't be fooled by the sterile flaws and scientific jargon, because the spirit behind it all, it hasn't changed. The modern alchemists are here, and they're not working with lead and gold anymore. They're working with you. Let's pull back the curtain. You may have heard of them. Colossal biosciences. Their goal? Bringing extinct species back to life. Mammoths, dodos, saber-toothed tigers. Sounds exciting, until you realize the deeper agenda. Resurrecting genomes, editing nature, creating a world where death is optional and consequences are programmable. And who's funding them? Big names, Silicon Valley elites, former DARPA officials. Because this isn't about saving animals, it's about perfecting the tools needed to rewrite creation. Alstosis Labs. Ever heard of it? Probably not. Because they don't want you to. Funded by Jeff Bezos, this ultra-secretive lab is pouring billions into cellular reprogramming, the process of reversing aging. On paper, it's about longevity. But beneath that, the attempt to conquer death itself, to build the immortal body, not through spirit, but through code. The dream of every ancient sorcerer, now digitized, sanitized, and normalized. Synthego, Veritas Genetics, Genentech. These firms don't just study DNA, they offer designer biology. Want to erase a disease from your future child? Done. Want to enhance IQ? Done. Want to make a generation that obeys, complies, doesn't rebel? Well, no one says that part out loud. But when you control the genome, you control the human, not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. They're not just editing traits, they're editing identity. And here's the real kicker. These companies are protected, legally, politically, financially. Why? Because what they're doing isn't science anymore. It's the new priesthood. They hold the sacred code now, the digital scrolls, the sequenced scripture of life. And just like ancient temples, these biotech labs are gate-kept by ritual, secrecy, and sacrifice. Only now, the sacrifice is us. Let me show you how deep this goes. In 2018, a Chinese scientist named He Jiankui announced that he had edited the genes of twin baby girls, making them resistant to HIV. The world panicked. Headlines exploded. The scientific community pretended to be outraged. But the truth? He wasn't rogue. He was first, the prototype. Because after hair came silence, then progress. Behind the scenes, human germline editing is now actively pursued in China, in private US labs, even in military programs. And it's not just humans. We now have pigs with human organs, mice with human brain cells, monkeys that pass human cognitive tests. The line has already been crossed. You're not being warned because you weren't meant to know. You were meant to adapt. Quietly, blindly, willingly. But if you've made it this far, you're not here to adapt. You're here to see, to witness the alchemy behind the illusion. So hear this. They've found a way to wear science like a mask, but behind it, it's the same ritual, the same war, the attempt to unmake man and rebuild him in the image of the beast. In the next episode, we enter the most sacred chamber of this entire operation, the blade itself, the tool they call CRISPR, the sword of the new gods, which they wield like a god, but use like a sorcerer. Stay sharp, stay awake, and subscribe to Beyond the Known, because this next rabbit hole cuts deep.